Welcome to Emerging Franchise Brands, the podcast that introduces you to the visionary founders of America's fastest growing franchise opportunities. We'll also hear from industry pros as they share what it really takes to achieve the elusive milestone of 100 plus locations. I am your host, Frank Fiume, founder of I9 Sports, and my 20-year journey from inception to acquisition has given me a unique perspective on how to succeed in franchising. Join me as we welcome today's guest. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. On today's show, I have the CEO of Chill and Nitrogen Ice Cream, David Leonardo. David, how are you?
Pretty good. How are you, Frank?
I'm doing great. Great to have you on the show.
Yeah, always excited to talk shop with people. All
right. Well, David, let's talk about Chill and Nitrogen. So tell me about the origin of this concept.
Yeah, this brand started back in 2012. The founder, Danny Golick, was just graduated from the University of Florida, taking a year off to study for his MCATs. And while he was studying, one of his buddies recommended they go up to the northern part of Florida where there was somebody pouring liquid nitrogen into a bowl of cream, whisking it, and turning it into ice cream. And this is back in 2011. So this is some time ago. He came down here and started tinkering and was convinced that this could be something that could really resonate with the Miami consumer, approached his father and mother and said, hey, I have some bad news. I'm thinking about putting off medical school. The good news is that I'm thinking about starting a business. And he comes from a family of entrepreneurs. They helped fund the first store back in 2012. It opened in Pinecrest, Florida. It is still open today, 13 years later. And from then, it just started really blossoming. And 7 years after opening that first location, they had 5 or 6 locations. They really started thinking to themselves, we really would like to now start considering franchising. And that's how they connected with me. And so I come from a franchising background and that we've been on this journey since 2019.
Awesome. So, David, what were you doing before this?
Yeah, so I have a pretty extensive background in franchising, more than 20 years plus, really at a corporate level for a lot of big multinational brands like Burger King, Arby's, Wendy's, Pet Supplies Plus, and a couple other brands, really doing domestic and international franchising work. So franchise development, really looking for private equity groups to sell either distressed stores or helping entrepreneurs expand their portfolios and broaden their portfolios into growing. At the time, to be honest with you, I was looking at maybe figuring out a way to stay here in Miami. I was going to be a father and I got presented to Danny and Donna and we sat down. I loved the concept at the time. The quality was amazing. The technology that they were using to kind of help create consistency, which is a huge plus in the franchising space, was something that I was really impressed with. And obviously the unit level economics was something that I was really, really enthralled by. So that's kind of how we started talking. And next thing you know, we kind of went on this crazy journey. And starting the franchise in 2019, little did we know we were going to get stuck into COVID for a couple of years. But shortly after COVID was over, it's really started expanding pretty rapidly.
Wow. I love asking CEOs, especially that come into a company, what possessed them to come in, into that brand and, what drew them in. Clearly the technology, that this was not your typical ice cream concept. The innovation of it all was something that drew you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I think whenever you're thinking about a franchise concept, and for any of your listeners thinking about either franchising their own concept or thinking about becoming multi-unit operators of maybe a franchise that they're currently a part of, you really want to make sure that something's scalable, right? And so whenever you start kind of removing a little bit of that human interaction and figuring out ways to automate things, you now start having better reports, better readings, better control of your costs. And remember, in the restaurant space, waste is something that, we're all struggle with. And so we've now been able to automate all of the dispensing of the cream and the bases into the bowls. And we've been able to automate the dispensing of the nitrogen, the mixing of the mixing of the mixers. So there's been a lot of automation that we've introduced since I joined, but that's one of the things that drew me to this brand. I mean, Danny's been a tinkerer, really, really focused on the technology side. And so he's always been tinkering on how to make it faster. One of the good things about our brand is that we make every single cup made to order right there in front of you. So we like to say that we're basically a neighborhood ice cream factory. We craft every cup to order with liquid nitrogen, and we use, very rich flavors. We can do large scale events. We can make desserts for businesses. We do birthday parties. So at the end of the day, there's a lot of things that you can customize in our experience. And so it's really important to to embrace technology where you can to help that process.
Wow. Look, I've never met Danny. I've never spoken to him, but I can tell, first of all, he's a really smart guy, because most founders have a hard time getting out of their own way when they franchise their concept. They think it's their baby and they need to do everything. But the fact that Danny brought you in even so early and realized that he's the tinkerer, as you put it, and needing somebody in franchising, that was a brilliant move. So he kind of got out of his own way early. Tell me a little bit about the beginning. Did you have a concern coming into his business on, was he really going to let go, or how did that whole conversation go?
Yeah, it's interesting. At the time, Danny and his mother kind of were getting to that point where they already had a portfolio of company stores. They really wanted to grow, but it just seemed like the infrastructure that they had was kind of maxed out for company growth at the moment. They just had so much interest from outside people, either wanting to license, wanting to grow. And so franchising was definitely a route. They went to an emerging franchisor conference in Philadelphia, which is a great conference every year for those of you interested in maybe franchising your concept.
Springboard.
The Springboard. That's right. That's right. The Fisher Group. So one of the things that they came out of there saying is that it's probably best to try to find somebody who has experience doing this. And I gotta give Danny and Donna credit. One of the first conversations we had was just being very realistic about what they know and what they don't know. And also for me, right? What I'm really good at and what I'm not good at. And even to this day, we each have our own lane, right? So Danny kind of heads up operations and technology. His mother, who's also a partner and co-founder, heads up all the administrative, accounting, and all the vendor relationships. And I head up all the franchise relations, franchise sales, and all the development, And so it's been very, very good to kind of see how we all complement each other in this relationship.
So David, when you came in, had the company already franchised, or was that part of the role that you had to play in getting an FDD and getting it franchisable?
Yeah, so they had just completed an FDD. So they had just started that process of completing. So I came in at the tail end of them drafting that FDD. Not to get too into the weeds, but when I first met the family, I came in originally to head up all of their development. And within several months, it became clear to all of us that there were just a lot of aspects of the business that needed addressing. And while I come from the development side, my background is hardcore finance and accounting, and I have I have experience doing a couple different things. And so we decided to kind of, upgrade the role that I had.
Fantastic.
And so that's how I became the CEO of the company. And yeah, but definitely there was an FDD, early draft an FDD. But they just hadn't started selling any franchises, haven't started really that process yet.
Okay. So what's life like when you start up, the company's franchised now. Tell me about the beginning of the franchise itself.
Well, the beginning of the franchise, I can tell you, was unlike any experience I've ever had, partly due to the fact that we had to pretty much close everything down shortly after with COVID, right?
Oh, gosh, that's right.
So the franchising division really was put on freeze for a couple years while we focused on operating our stores, our company stores. Now we had to pivot extremely quickly. We went from doing delivery, and 9% of our business was delivery, to almost 75% of our business was delivery, up to 70% of our business during the COVID years. So, revamping the website, introducing delivery partners, really kind of changing the entire operational structure so that nobody was allowed to come into the store. And we brought the counter to the front of the store in all of our locations. There was just a huge focus. But what ended up happening is luckily our sales increased during COVID. Increased, our performance increased. And granted, we had a lot of headaches just like everyone else.
Sure.
But it also drove a lot of people down to Florida. And a lot of people from all over the country were coming to Florida for a variety of different reasons. But they started asking themselves, wait a minute, this brand looks like a great brand. They're making custom ice cream. They have non-dairy bases. They have gluten-free options. They have a lot of things. And you're just basically having a Chipotle experience with ice cream.
Right.
And we don't have something like that back in my hometown. So we ended up selling a ton of franchises, believe it or not, right after the vaccine came out. So we ended up selling a ton of franchises, and it's been great getting the brand out there. But it wasn't all rosy. It wasn't a
Sure,
rosy path to get there. That's for sure.
it never is. Right. It never is.
I'll share just a quick story if you
Please.
mind me. It's been a tough road at the beginning. We had a family office approach us about potentially becoming franchisees of the system. And for a small brand like us, it was just so humbling and obviously so exciting to see someone who was willing to put millions of dollars to help grow the brand.
Mm-hmm.
And we spent quite a bit of time doing it, but that discussion turned into them wanting to make an investment in the parent company. And unfortunately, what it ended up doing was it just ended up sucking so much time, effort, and money out of everything we were doing that deal after several months really just died. And so I'm actually telling this story to be a warning for anybody out there in the franchising space that really try not to take your focus off the fact that singles and doubles are really what you should be focusing on in the first couple years. Those home runs can come later. But honestly, singles and doubles are really what's going to get you to that next stage where you can start maybe considering some bigger deals.
Absolutely. David, that is brilliant. And there's too many emerging founders that are chasing the next shiny thing, or they get an opportunity and they think, oh, this is what's going to save my business or get me to the next level. And you know this from being from big brands. It is about hitting singles and doubles and being really good at the things that you need to focus on, as opposed to somebody who just happens to knock on your door or give you a call and say, hey, we want to be part of something. And now you're completely distracted and, you're doing something that you shouldn't have entertained. It takes away from the overall business.
Very well put, Frank. Yeah, that's exactly the lesson here. And if I can always share some of the failures we had with anybody considering becoming a franchisor or maybe becoming a franchisee of another concept, we all have them, right? I don't think there's a single brand who doesn't have these stories of maybe that tombstone that never happened is actually the best thing that could happen to you, right?
Absolutely. There's an old quote that it's a baseball quote, but it's some of the best trades are the ones that you don't make.
There you go. A great one.
And that's it.
Yeah.
Great point. David, tell me about, when did you think maybe there was a pivotal moment in the business where you thought, we're really onto something big here? I think this is we've got something here.
Yeah, look, I was very intrigued from the beginning with a concept, because unlike maybe other concepts that are thinking about franchise, the family, Danny and Donna, had done the work with opening multiple locations, right? So they didn't have this illusion that after the first location in Pinecrest, which actually is still to this day the highest performing store in the system, but they didn't have this illusion of saying, we're ready to franchise now after one store. They actually opened 5 stores. They waited, close to 7 years before they started selling franchises, and really 9 years before, the first one was sold, and 10 years before the first one opened. So I will tell you that I felt very confident even before we started opening up franchise stores that we had something here, because I had in my portfolio of company stores the bad location,
right?
The bad location with low rent, the amazing location with very high rent, the moderate location, but with great unit level economics and a great demographics and everything that you want. And so we had a little bit of everything, and the model was working in almost every case, which different focuses on the P&L, but kind of had an example to explain to everyone. You know what I mean? So when I felt that this was really something that could scale is when I started opening up franchise stores in markets outside of South Florida. And I started seeing the attraction that people had, especially in markets where there's never been a provider of custom-made ice cream right there on the spot, right? And to see the people come in, and it's almost like tasting ice cream for the first time. You're basically getting an ice cream right off the assembly line. And if you've never had it, it's as creamy as gelato. Right? It's literally coming right off the assembly line. It's freshly made, and you put your spoon into it, and it's just, it's a mixture between ice cream and gelato, and the taste is so rich. And obviously the taste has to do with the quality ingredients that we select. But yeah, I started seeing the reaction in other markets where people are clamoring for something of high quality. And I said, wait a minute, I think we have something really, really good here. So that was probably my first time.
Well, it's great that they didn't put the pressure on you to open up so many units starting out, and that you had the opportunity to be in different markets to see what will work and what doesn't work. Because as you get inquiries from people looking to buy a franchise, what markets look similar to the ones that did well versus not.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And also, I think you want to make clear decisions about where you should go and where you shouldn't go, right? And so
Yeah.
we've been strategic about the markets we're in, and we're trying to keep them close within an hour and a half flight to where we're at. Texas and Tennessee are really kind of strong markets, but we also chose some really strong operators. And the operators you select at an early stage company are very different from a mid-range company to, more established brands, which is where I come from, right?
Sure.
Because these operators may get one visit a year. Maybe we might get two visits a year. I mean, we're
Right.
doing calls every week or every 15 days. We do calls with them, but you really need a certain kind of operator that can do that grassroots marketing, that can do a lot of stuff. Because I don't have a national ad fund, for instance,
Sure.
and I purposely did not do that. Because at the end of the day, with a couple part-time employees here, what can I do on the national level, right? I am taking all of the marketing support that I'm providing franchisees right now are coming out of royalties. And so these are just things that I've learned as part of a very large brand that I want to make sure that if I ever had the chance to kind of create it from the ground up, I'd probably try to avoid certain mistakes.
Yeah, David, you're kind of the exception to the rule. I find when I talk to other founders that are bringing in leadership, they typically don't bring leadership in of somebody that's from a really, really well-established, mature brand like a Burger King or an Arby's to come to lead an emerging concept, because oftentimes that person can't relate to the founder, can't relate to the situations or problems that happen. Or in your case, you don't have a brand fund here with Chill and Nitrogen.
Right.
Burger King and Arby's, of course, they can do massive amounts of marketing and advertising with those ad funds. So you even had to deal with a different type of franchisee who's not your typical franchisee in a much larger, mature concept, right?
Yeah, yeah. And look, I think while I started my career in some of these big brands, I did have, some experience working with mid-tier brands, right? 30 or 40 franchisees, and also I come from a family of entrepreneurs, right? So there's a little bit of that background there.
Nice.
My father and mother have always worked for themselves, and my father, was an immigrant here, and he kind of started what they call bodegas in New York. And they're
Come on, I'm
little.
from New York. I know what a bodega
All right, there
is.
you go. There you go. All right, look at that. I like that. So you know what it's like. And so I've always had the experience of really not being scared of rolling up your sleeve. And one of the things that I find in this early stage is that you really have to find people who are willing to wear multiple hats, first of all. And
Right.
that becomes very hard when they're working for large multinational corporations where they're really focused on a silo, right? And so the ability for me to kind of, spend the full day with marketing, or go and sit with Danny and talk about technology with a vendor of ours or a software developer, or, supply chain issues that we currently been having because of all the tariffs. So getting willing to sit down and roll up your sleeves and do that is the sign of someone who's not afraid, right, of
Right.
getting in the weeds. And that tends to be a little bit harder for people who've been accustomed to more of the higher multinational scenario.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit more about the ideal franchisee, David. What type of person do you think thrives in your system?
Yeah, so I would say, getting back to what I just described, the type of executive that would thrive in this role, which is someone not afraid of rolling up their sleeve, is exactly the kind of franchisee I want, right? We've done extremely well with people who come from hospitality, or people who come from the restaurant space, or have had exposure in that space. I think one of the things that I find myself doing with a lot of candidates when we do our webinars is trying to explain to them that this is not a walk in the park. This is an ice cream brand, but at the end of the day, it is counting pennies. You got to make sure you're on top of your labor. You got to make sure you're on top of your COGS. You got to make sure you're on top of your P&L, and how we can support you doing all of those things. So I want a person who can pay attention to the details, but can also be a very motivating factor to their employees.
Yeah.
I try to spend quite a bit of time explaining to them that in many cases, they may be the first employer that these employees find and meet.
Yes.
We have high school employees and college employees. And a little sidebar, how great of an opportunity for you to be influencing those kids in your community and be that first impression of a boss that they have.
Right.
But with that comes accountability, right? You have to make sure kids are accountable. They get there on time. You got to make sure that you're holding them to a standard. And that may mean from time to time letting people go if they're not meeting those standards, because it's not just about holding them accountable, but it's also about sending a message to the rest of your staff. So it's about looking for people who understand that, right? And also have a vision that while I may be looking at this first store, I have a vision for multiple units. You know, because I have to say, Frank, and you tell me if you've seen it this way, but franchising, unlike maybe 20 plus years ago when I got into it, it's really not a one unit business anymore.
It's not. The days of the mom and pop they're
It's just
over.
It's not. And while you may be a mom and pop and saying, I want to get into this franchise concept, the fact of the matter is that you really have to have a vision of getting into and potentially developing multiple units.
Right.
And that's really when you have a company, right? Like when you have one store, what you've really paid for is a guaranteed employment.
Yeah, you bought yourself a job. You're absolutely, as an operator, that's it. But you're talking about a totally different type of buyer than you and I knew from 20 years ago.
Oh, absolutely.
And a note to everybody that's watching or hearing this, you notice that David didn't mention anything about ice cream, about running a franchise, because it has nothing to do with ice cream. This has everything to do with being a leader, being a business owner. And have you found that most of your franchisees, is this their first business they're getting into, or are they experienced entrepreneurs from, past lives?
Yeah, we have a little bit of both, but I would find more often than not, this is their first entrepreneurial venture.
Sure.
To give you a sense of some of the kind of like categories we're going after, we have one of our first franchisee was a girl who was graduating high school, told her father, look, unlike my sister, I'm not really, I want to pursue in your entrepreneurial footsteps, and I don't want to go to college like my sister. And so I want to potentially start a business like you did, 30 years ago, and I want to be my own boss. And he said, well, let's start looking. And they negotiated with us. She found us, they negotiated, and training here is about 10 days. He basically got her apartment for 2 months and said, you're moving to Miami and you're going to work in the store for 2 months.
Wow.
That girl in 60 days did not take one day off. She could have gone to the beach. So what I'm saying is, like, there's one example of a young, and she's, to this day, she's one of our best operators. She is extremely detailed. She's extremely on top of her employees. She does everything. When she needs something and she's in dire need, her father would be like, okay, what can I help you with? Other than that, her father's letting her run the entire business.
That's
and she's
awesome.
now 22 years old. And she's looking for her second store, and we're extremely proud of her. But we also have people where husbands are doing full-time jobs, wives were focused so much on the kids, raising the kids, that they're now looking to get back into some type of workforce, but they don't want to go into that 9 to 5,
Right.
And they're saying, look, let's start a franchise. That has a little bit of flexibility. I can get to a point where I hire people, guide people. But if I have to step out, if I have to go away for a weekend, I have a key manager who can run that. So there's a little more flexibility with that. And then the last one that I'm really proud of is that hospitality person that worked in hospitality their whole life and said, look, I'd really like to kind of start my own thing. Right. Yeah. They've ran restaurants. They've done the hotel stuff. They understand what customer service is. They understand what, working in a restaurant's like. Those guys have really been amazing operators for us. So we have a little bit of everything to give you an idea of what we have.
Okay. David, all your years of being in Fran Dev and being in franchising in general, how effective have you found, or do you use a behavioral assessment program or a behavioral assessment test or anything to help yourself, giving yourself the edge that you're picking the right person? Or how do you pick the right person?
I have to first tell you that I love those tools. Those tools, I've been exposed to those tools in the past, and we are currently looking at bringing one of those tools in. One of the realities of this business is that this business is currently being funded by the founders.
Right.
And so we have to be extremely cautious of anything around costs and budgets and stuff like that. So we do look at bringing some of those things in, but I think it's probably going to be something closer to 2026 where we kind of roll something like that. In the meantime, you're spending a lot of time with me.
Right.
I'm spending a lot of time talking to people and you're spending a lot of time with my partners.
Yeah.
We're not just asking you scenario questions, but we're also asking you, what are your failures? If you come to me and you've gotten to this stage in your life with no failures, I don't know if this is for you. You know what I
Great
mean?
point.
Because it's just, this is a business that it's not so much about whether you're going to fail. It's going to be how many times am I going to fail and get back up? Right. We're constantly failing here. And it's been great lessons that we learn. And I tell all my employees, you better be making mistakes. But what I don't want you is to make the same mistake twice.
Exactly.
But a lot of personal time talking. But I do believe that those assessments come in very handy. I have a lead generation tool that I'm using right now. I'll give a little shout out to Frank Connect. That's been one of our early investments and continues to be an investment of mine. It monitors the sale process and can actually help me basically do my dual role as a franchise development, head of franchise development, as well as CEO. And so I've have it all set up to automate emails and stuff like that. So that's been very helpful.
Yeah. Well, I'm a huge fan of the behavioral assessment tools. And I would tell founders that are listening to this that your brand is able to get away from it because of you, because you know what to sniff out for with your experience. Yeah. But if you don't have that experience in franchising and you're starting out, you can't afford to make a wrong decision. Like that young girl that you've got, 22 years old, she was a needle in a haystack.
Yes, you're absolutely right. You are absolutely right. And frankly, we've also made some mistakes, early on
do.
with franchisees. And we've had to come in and step in and frankly, just because they have the money, just because they have the interest, again, the type of franchisee you're looking for at early stage may not be the person with all the money, but it's really that person who's not afraid of getting out in that local community, being a good leader, and really looking at the numbers. Those three things for me is really pivotal. But when you're early stage and you get people to come in, it's, but we've learned from those mistakes and now you chalk it off. Look, that is definitely not what we want, right?
Yes, exactly. I know that sometimes it's process of elimination. Like, okay, right. I know I don't want that next time.
Right.
Yeah.
But I would say there is not a brand out there that doesn't have some of those stories. The problem is when I was at Burger King and Arby's and stuff like that, we had a lot of those stories. You can afford to make a lot of those mistakes. When you're at your early stage, you can't afford too many of those mistakes.
You are absolutely right. That is great advice, David. Great advice. Okay, let me ask you, what's the investment range to open a location?
Yeah, so the investment range, I tell people it's between $350 and $550 to open a store. That is a full turnkey number. The delta there is purely construction, right? I mean, and we're getting ready to open up a conversion. So for those of your listeners who don't know that was previously, in this case, it was previously an ice cream shop. Closed down. So we're getting a grease trap, we're getting a bathroom, we're getting a kitchen, we're getting a lot of the equipment in there, and we're just bringing in kind of custom made equipment for us, right? Front counter, back counter, seating, marketing. And so that's probably going to be a little under $300K. But then we have what they call a gray shell, brand new shopping center. Landlord hands me the keys. I walk in, there's dirt on the floor. There's no AC, there's no ceiling, there's no walls. And so those can cost you, north of $500,000. Obviously, the pros on those is that the landlord is usually willing to give you what's called tenant improvement allowance. Yeah. So you get 40, 50, up to $100,000 in some of those cases. So
how big is the location? Yeah, how big is the location?
Anywhere between 900 and 1,100 square feet.
All right, so it's pretty tight.
Pretty tight. I am not a big fan of big spots.
I agree.
I keep in mind, this is not a typical restaurant. People coming in 10, 15 minutes. So, you get me 1,000 square feet. I'm really happy,
Right.
I'll give you one point of reference. Our highest volume store in the entire system today, and since the concept began, is still the first store. It sits in 680 square feet.
Wow.
And it does close to $900K a year.
That's amazing.
And so it is possible. It's, the visibility is great. The parking is great. The line is moving, and our production can produce 120 cups an hour. So the team there is phenomenal. So, bigger isn't always better.
Right.
So I am very sensitive to rent. And so that's why we have said no to a lot of sites because of rent. But that's that's just the nature of where we're at.
Yeah. David, where do you see this brand growing in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so I think what we're doing over the next 12, 18 months is we've still got some upgrades that we're really excited about on the technology side. We're probably going to be growing 3 to 5 locations over the next 2 to 3 years per year. And then I see ourselves getting to about 60, 70 locations, by the end of the decade. Maybe the start of, 2030, 2031, I could see us getting, right around 60 locations. So I'd say maybe 3 or 4 locations for the next 2, maybe 3 years, and then maybe jump to 7 or 8 stores a year.
Do you see this as a legacy business fit for Danny and Donna, right?
Danny and Donna, correct.
And yourself, or do you see them building this to a certain level and saying, we're going to roll this thing up and sell it? What do you think long-term plan is?
That long-term plan is actually tied into the earlier question. And I think our scalability is definitely tied to potentially bringing outside investors, because our scale is definitely limited by obviously the resources that we have.
Sure.
So the reason I'm mentioning that we'll probably start scaling up in 2 or 3 years is because we'll probably be ready to start entertaining those conversations with outside investors.
Right.
And start saying, okay, we're ready to start putting a little fuel on this fire. But until we get to a point where we really have kind of tested this thing out and really are ready to have those conversations, we're having conversations now, but I think maybe when we get to maybe, 30, 25, 30 stores, that's probably when we probably start getting on the radar to a lot more of them.
Right. It happens eventually for all of us.
Yeah.
If you're growing a great brand. Is there a strategy moving forward for you guys in terms of opening of stores to continue a dual strategy with company owned and franchise, or are you going strictly franchise open from here on out?
At this point, it's just franchise openings. When the day comes for us to entertain outside money, I do think that there's a justification to allocate some of that capital for being opportunistic with conversion opportunities in markets where we don't have a franchisee. So there have been opportunities that have been presented to us where we don't have a franchisee and we'd love to take advantage of it. But because it's outside of our core market, or because, we don't have a base of operations there, we haven't taken advantage of it. So there may be an opportunity to grow the company portfolio. But again, that takes infrastructure, that takes support, that takes bringing on, a little bit more. Danny right now is our COO. Right. So it takes a little bit more infrastructure. So I do think that company portfolio for now is going to stay where it's at until we entertain outside capital, and then we could kind of expand the infrastructure to kind of help support that.
Right. Well, okay. Well, my next question, I kind of know the answer to it, but I'd love to hear it anyway. Why is now a great time for somebody to join the brand?
Listen, I think right now is a great time for a couple reasons. First and foremost, for those of you thinking about taking the plunge, it's never going to be a better time. Like, there's more instability now in corporate America than there ever was. Nobody's ever loyal to you. I mean, it's just a time to say, look, I'm ready to take ownership about my future, right? The second thing I'll tell you is that this brand is not the sexiest brand, but you know what it is? It's been anti-recessionary for decades. When things go bad in this world, and COVID proved it to us, people resort to things that are comfortable to them. They may not go out to that expensive dinner, but you know what? They're going to take their kids out to get that ice cream, right? And so we've been experiencing growth since I've joined the company, and really since 2012, right? And then the last thing I'll tell you is we live in a world where everybody wants to customize their experience. And what better way to customize your experience than walk into an ice cream shop with 3 kids? One of them can eat dairy, the other one is allergic to dairy, and the other one, who's a teenager, decided to go gluten-free for whatever reason. You know what I mean? And you could go into the same place, and then, your wife has different dietary restrictions. Your grandfather has diabetes, and now you have the no sugar option, you have the gluten-free option, you have all these options there that you can create an ice cream strictly for every person. And so in a world where everybody's trying to customize every experience, I think we're the ice cream brand that wants to get you there.
David, when are you opening a location in Tampa?
When we find the right partner. I mean, Tampa's a great market. Honestly, it's a great market. I got a lot of buddies out there, and it's really makes sense because it's a contiguous market. So we got some in Orlando. Yeah. Tampa is the next logical step. So
we're next. All right. Well, if someone was interested in learning more about Chillin' Nitrogen ice cream, where would they go?
Just go to chillin.com. That's chill and then N, chillin.com. And you can hit on the inquiry button, and you can honestly set up a call directly with me. Like I said, we're a small company. You're going to be dealing directly with me.
How did you get that domain name?
Right? Isn't it cool?
That is amazing. Yeah, that is a powerful domain name. I can't believe that you guys got that.
You can also follow us on Chillin' Ice Cream Instagram handle or chillin_CEO. And so we're definitely there, and we try to reply to you as soon as possible. So
nice.
And the next time you're down in Miami, come visit us.
I will for sure. I got one last question for you. So David, I always end every podcast with, I call it the franchise tip jar, because the franchise community is so generous with sharing of advice. So I'd love to ask you this, since especially with your experience in franchising, what do you think is the most underrated skill that a franchisor needs, but nobody talks about?
I think that one of the most underrated skills that a franchisor needs is being very open about having difficult conversations. Maybe that's it. I think you need to have conversations early on and not wait till things get out of control. And so if you want a great skill set, it starts saying you have to have certain metrics that you follow. And when you start seeing trends that some of these metrics are falling off, instead of brushing it aside and just kind of, oh, this is bad, you really need to nip things in the butt, because if things start getting out of control, that's when things start unraveling.
That's great advice. Get ahead of it, right? Get ahead of it with conversation. Don't be afraid to have the tough conversation. If you're going to be a franchisor that's going to grow to many units, you're inevitably going to have those conversations. So start building that muscle early.
That's it. I like that.
Yeah. David, thank you so much for being on the show. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Yeah, Frank, you've been great to chat with. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. And for all your listeners out there, this is a great asset that you've provided for them. So this is great.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fiume, or Emerging Franchise Group, LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.